At 1:24 in the morning on the 26th of March 2024, 8 men were patching potholes on the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. 7 were a road maintenance crew, 1 was an inspector. Just over a mile away, a container ship called the Dali was leaving port with 23 people aboard. Within 5 minutes, that ship had lost electrical power twice, lost its steering, and was drifting toward the bridge's southern support pier. Police officers stationed at both ends of the bridge were told to stop traffic. They did. The National Transportation Safety Board found the bridge was clear of vehicles about 48 seconds before the ship struck it, and concluded those actions prevented a greater loss of life. Nobody told the 8 men standing on the span. 6 of them died. This account is built from the NTSB's own final report, adopted by the board in November 2025. The findings themselves, not the coverage of them. The Key Bridge opened in 1977, carrying Interstate 695 across the Patapsco River. The NTSB records that over 34,000 vehicles crossed it every day, roughly a tenth of them trucks. It was also the designated route for vehicles carrying hazardous materials, which are barred from the tunnels under Baltimore's waterways. The Dali was a Singapore-flagged container ship, 984 feet long, built by HD Hyundai Heavy Industries and operated by Synergy Marine. The day before the accident, on the 25th of March, the ship blacked out twice while still in port. Investigators would later find that the second of those in-port blackouts shared its cause with one of the failures that came the following night. The ship was carrying containers of corrosive and flammable material. It left Seagirt Marine Terminal shortly after midnight, under the direction of 2 harbor pilots, heading out through a channel that passes directly beneath the bridge. The NTSB reconstructed the sequence in detail. Inside the ship's high-voltage switchboard, a single signal wire, the report calls it Wire 1, was electrically disconnected from its terminal block. That disconnection caused a high-voltage breaker to open. The breaker opening cut power to a step-down transformer, and the loss of that transformer took down the ship's low-voltage electrical bus. The low-voltage bus powered the lighting. It also powered the steering gear pumps and the main engine's cooling water pump. Investigators found that when it went dark, the ship lost propulsion and steering together. The main engine was configured to shut down automatically if cooling water pressure dropped. It did. The report notes this configuration met classification standards when the vessel was built, and still left the ship unable to maneuver. Then a second blackout followed. The generators that were running depended on what the report calls a flushing pump, a pump designed to clear fuel lines during maintenance, to supply fuel pressure, and was instead used as the service pump. Unlike the pumps designed for that job, it had no backup and would not restart on its own after a power loss. It did not restart. The generators lost fuel pressure, and the ship went dark a second time. The pilots and bridge team acted, and the NTSB found their response timely. The ship was simply too close to the bridge for anything to work. If you want the version of these stories that comes out of the investigation report rather than the press release, subscribing helps. The next part of this is the finding that took investigators a month to locate, and it is smaller than a fingernail. Finding the cause meant searching a ship the report describes as nearly 1,000 feet long, with miles of wiring and thousands of electrical connections. NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy compared it to hunting a loose rivet on the Eiffel Tower. Investigators worked through the switchboard. At one point they left a transformer energized and its breaker closed, to see whether the fault would repeat itself. 2 days later the breaker tripped on its own and caused a blackout, the same failure that had occurred on the night of the accident, reproduced in front of them. That narrowed it to one connection. Terminal Block 381, Wire 1. The report also records what the investigation could not recover. The ship's voyage data recorder mixed multiple microphones into shared channels, which the NTSB found significantly impaired its ability to separate voices, alarms, and conversations on the bridge. Audio from both sides of the ship's internal telephone was not recorded at all, so investigators could not hear the engine room answering the bridge during the emergency. The recorder complied with international standards. The NTSB found the standards themselves left a gap between what gets recorded and what an investigation actually needs. Every signal wire in that switchboard carried a small identifying sleeve, a thermoplastic band, heat shrunk around the wire, printed with the terminal block it belonged to. It exists so that an engineer years later can trace where a wire goes. It carries no current. It performs no safety function. On wire 1, that band was in the wrong place. The report's finding is precise. The band covered the entire blue insulated collar of the ferrule at the end of the wire. Covering it increased the ferrule's overall circumference. The wire could not be pushed fully into the terminal block's spring clamp gate. Its tip was barely held from the moment of assembly. The wire was not damaged. It was not worn out. It was not overloaded. It had never been properly inserted, and no inspection in the ship's maintenance program was designed to catch that. The NTSB found that infrared thermal imaging, a technique that reveals failing electrical connections invisible to the eye, might have identified the loose wire had it been used on that switchboard. Then comes the recommendation that shows how ordinary this failure was. The NTSB wrote to Wago Corporation, the company that manufactured the terminal block, Model 280-681, and asked it to add a warning to the product data sheet that improperly placed wire label banding can stop a wire seating properly. It wrote to HD Hyundai Heavy Industries asking that correct banding methods be written into its electrical department's standard operating procedures. The remedy for the deadliest bridge collapse in recent American history includes a paragraph added to a data sheet and a line added to a shipyard work instruction. A loose wire explains the ship. It does not explain the bridge. In March 2025, the NTSB issued a separate report on that question. It found that had the Maryland Transportation Authority carried out a vulnerability assessment of the Key Bridge, as recommended by the AASHTO guide specifications published in 1991 and again in 2009, the authority would have known the bridge stood at almost 30 times the AASHTO threshold of risk for catastrophic collapse from a vessel strike. The guidance was 33 years old. The calculation was never run. A footnote in the board summary records something the coverage of that report did not. The Maryland Department of Transportation's State Highway Administration sat on the development committee for the 2009 guide specifications. The MDTA itself was a member of the AASHTO subcommittee whose design specifications referenced that guidance. The NTSB then identified 68 bridges over navigable waterways used by ocean-going ships, built before 1996, that may never have had such an assessment, among them the Golden Gate, the Brooklyn Bridge, and the Mackinac Bridge. It asked 30 owners to run the calculation. All 30 responded. In the final report, the NTSB addressed a further recommendation to 20 of those owners, those whose bridges came back above the AASHTO threshold, or who had not finished the calculation at all, asking them to consider fitting systems that would warn and stop drivers from entering a bridge once a threat is detected. The Key Bridge had no such system. The report notes that methods of preventing motorist deaths in bridge collapses have been promoted since the 1970s. The NTSB found that had the workers been notified at the same time the police officers were told to block traffic, they may have had enough time to drive to a section of the bridge that did not collapse. At the board meeting, investigators put that window at 1 minute and 29 seconds. 6 of the 7 road maintenance workers died. 1 survived with serious injuries. The inspector escaped. Damage to the ship exceeded $18 million. The bridge replacement is estimated at between $4.3 and $5.2 billion and is not expected to open until late 2030. The ship's owner and operator, Grace Ocean and Synergy Marine, have sued the shipbuilder HD Hyundai Heavy Industries over the switchboard. Hyundai has publicly defended its original design, arguing that modifications made after delivery removed redundancies. Those claims have not been resolved. The Maryland Transportation Authority, after the final report, maintained its position that the collapse and the deaths were the fault of the Dali and its owners and operators, and that the bridge was approved and permitted by the federal government and complied with those permits. Safety systems are built around the parts that do the work. The wire carries current, so the wire gets tested. The breaker interrupts fault current, so the breaker gets tested. The label identifies things, so nobody tests the label. A system inspects what it believes can fail. Everything outside that belief is unmonitored by definition, and that is where the failure that nobody planned for comes from. The NTSB's final report on the Key Bridge collapse runs to 259 pages and is free to read. The link is in the description, along with the terminal block finding, on page 1 of the conclusions.